I'm thrilled to be here. I got introduced as the lead LGBTQ interpretation person for the Alice Austen House. I'm actually the executive director, so it's kind of a job that I've created because no one else was going to do it. And I could see that before I became the executive director, and so it became a tooth and nail struggle and a process of many free hours of work, and is a personal labour of love, but which has had the support of many incredible people from LGBTQ historic sites projects. So let's have a look at the Alice Austen House. So the Alice Austen House is a beautiful little sort of Victorian Gothic cottage. It was originally a Dutch farmhouse built in 1690. It's located on the shoreline of Staten Island and looks directly out to New York City. It sees all of the boats that come in through New York's only remaining working waterway. And Alice Austen would have seen the vast numbers of immigrants on ships coming through that waterway. In fact, the Alice Austen House was called the first house on the left. This is Alice, and I can't start talking about this project at all without looking at her and showing you a few of her photographs. Who was she? She was born in 1866. She was a lesbian, and something that came up in Alison's talk, I'm so interested in Alison's work, was how we refer to these people and their sexuality, because of course Alice wouldn't have called herself a lesbian, but we in fact do claim that term for her today. And on the other side of the screen is Alice and Gertrude Tate. Gertrude Tate was her partner for 53 years, 30 of those years spent in the Alice Austen House, which the Alice Austen family called Clear Comfort. So here is a rare portrait of Alice laughing, smiling, having fun with her friends, cross-dressing in the yard of Clear Comfort. Notice the clever positioning of the umbrella. 1891 people. So I'm just going to race through some images so we can get to the nuts and bolts of what's happening at the house. Here's Alice, 3 in a bed with some of her very good friends that we have a letter collection of. And on the other side of the screen, we have 2 male friends. She didn't just hang out with women, cross-dressing for Alice for one of her photographs. Her friends were incredibly cooperative for all of her photography, posing often for obviously longer exposures. This is the Darned Club, one of many of Alice's women-only clubs. It was actually named the Darned Club by men because they wouldn't allow men to participate. And again, here is Alice. Here, very naughty, in their petticoats, showing their legs, smoking fake cigarettes, actually taken in St. John's Rectory, just up the road from the Alice Austen House. And then on the other side, it's a classic portrait reminiscent of many that Alice took of her friends in front of Clear Comfort. And by the way, Clear Comfort was really, the house was Alice's muse. It was her studio, and her passion through so much of her work. So the home is extremely important here if we're talking about artist studios. And just another example, her friends posing, pretending to be drunk, and some more actually relatives on the beach in Staten Island. And here we have Alice. Taking a photograph. She was actually the first woman on Staten Island to own a car, and she owned several and she could fix them. She rolled with a tool bag. That's Gertrude looking out at the camera person, having a bit of a giggle about Alice. She also, very interestingly, spent years and years visiting quarantine stations in New York, photographing the sanitation facilities. She was extraordinarily interested in new technologies. and she ventured out onto the streets with her bicycle in Manhattan with up to 50 pounds of photographic equipment at a time, and would have had to have had the agreement with the immigrants to photograph them because they posed for her, and she's very well known for her work, which she called street types. But there's a large division between the work that is the work that she intended for public consumption and the work that was for her own private entertainment. And we get the joy of seeing both. So we have been in a 5-year, a little bit more period of looking at reinterpreting Alice's work, asking these essential questions that we all ask ourselves, hopefully, when we work in historic houses and moreover historic artists' homes and studios. So right to it. So 6 months ago, a little bit more than 6 months ago, this is what the dining room looked like at the Alice Austen house. It's not a particularly big house, so you've got really limited space to teach in and interpret in. Alice took over 8,000 photographs in her lifetime in this room. One small point. In 1945, Alice was evicted from the home. She did lose all her money, and therefore most of her objects were sold. So there is not a large object collection to deal with. This room is decorated with not a single piece of Alice Austen's own or authentic furniture. She took 8,000 photographs. Obviously, Claire Comfort was one of her muses. She photographed the interior and the exterior park extensively, and there's one photo on display that doesn't even have a tag referencing that it's Alice's. The room was roped off, so you couldn't even step into it. Keep in mind, there's very little space to even move about in the house. Here's the former parlour. It was you would be walking and be pinned in by these very clunky barriers that just had 3 images on display. It's decorated with a player organ. Alice never had one of those. Most objects in the space are just putting weight and making the house groan. Really, really problematic. So the idea had been that people could come in and do a self-guided tour, which I did 11 years ago. Walked out, didn't know Alice was a photographer. Certainly didn't know she was a lesbian. Things that would have really interested me as a lesbian artist. Just none of these things were available. It was all about sort of antiques in a house, and that's actually really common in historic houses, and it's the reason why they're just visions of white wealth. I mean, what's going to really draw someone in and make someone say, hey, I want to find out more about this, or allow someone to actually ask questions. Okay, so people did know about Alice, okay? So really it was the LGBTQ community that had kept on trying to make the museum, which opened its doors in 1985, realise that they needed to tell a truthful story about Alice and celebrate it, for God's sakes. The work's so important. And so there were protests on the lawn, and there's actually video footage. Barbara Hammer, a really incredible artist who just passed away, unfortunately, made a film called The Female Closet and included Alice Austen in it. And you can even you can just do protest at Alice Austen House, and you'll see this hilarious protest that happened with the Dyke Preserver ending up being hung on the fence. So what happened was really not the museum pushing for it, but it was an outside influences happening to the museum, and the museum sort of passively starting to come around and accept it. That's also due to a change in some board members. Staten Island's also, I just might tell you, the most homophobic borough in New York. They vote Trump too, which you always think of New York as being entirely democratic voting. Not getting into politics here though. So anyway, by 2017, we'd already had, same-sex couples starting to marry on our lawn. It's it's hard to earn money at these sites, so of course we do have this beautiful location. We rent it out for weddings. And the Pride Centre of Staten Island had asked to have their coming out day picnic there. And that was all pretty fine, and it was really under the radar. But more importantly, the New York LGBTQ Historic Sites Project worked really, really hard. And of course, we were already nationally landmarked. And in 2017, we were able to celebrate amending the designation to include LGBTQ history, becoming the second site in New York, Stonewall Monument being the first site just the year before. And at that time, there was only 14 sites across America. I've since become part of the crew that goes and presents at the Historic Societies and Landmarks Preservation to try and get more sites on the map. So this was a huge responsibility we're actually taking on. The board seemed to think that it was good enough that we just amended our designation and we should carry on as normal. In fact, the docents had previously been actively told never to mention Gertrude's name. Part of the tour was watching a video that did not mention Gertrude's existence at all, and it was like half-hour long. So we got a planning grant from the National Endowment of Humanities and actually brought in independent scholars, which is why it's so interesting to hear independent scholars speak today, because it's really key. You run one of these museums, you're also putting out the trash, you're so busy, you're doing all the funding, everything. Woe to go. But anyway, so really great scholars, Lillian Faderman, Richard Mayer. So it wasn't just LGBTQ scholars, it was also women's history scholars and photographic scholars. Came in and all looked individually at Alice's work and made recommendations of how we might reinterpret the house. And this is just a quick show that before you saw that we only really had 4 photographs on prominent display, and these are all the themes in Alice's work that we could possibly squeeze out of this space and retain 2 contemporary galleries. So this is the dining room today. On an incredibly limited budget, brought this one home, the whole thing, for around about 200 grand. I say that because it was hair-raising. We'd never even had overhead lighting in the house before, so it's first time. And whilst it might look a little stark, the whole idea of this is so that people can move into the space. None of those objects had even been accessioned, so that was one, it was an incredible headache to find out where they came from, when they were bought. Just tracking down paper records was massive, because we want to document everything that's happened also. Not just suddenly say, okay, we're reinterpreting and have no paper trail of everything that happened. But so now we have Alice's camera in the center of the space, her photography, her career is front and center. She's no longer just referred to as an amateur photographer, although that word meant something a little bit different during her era. And we're able to show, explode some of the quotes and the writing that has happened about Alice, but there's actually the last book on Alice was produced in 1976. So the act of closeting of Alice actually has closeted her work. She's so little known and the work is so important. Drawers open up, educational possibilities. We can bring in a group of 30 students, break them into 2 rooms, and they're actually able to engage with some of the history of photography, Alice's techniques, and obviously all of these themes that are present. We're also able to, we're so lucky because we have photographs of the interior of the house and the exterior to show all of those photographs. So for those people that are like, oh no, where's our historic? It's like, it's here. We have it. We don't have the objects. Look, we haven't tried to put them away. We love the house. We want to acknowledge its architectural history, but here you go. We've got a ton of photographs. And like I say back here, necessary evil, we actually have some electronic slideshows. They're really tastefully done. They're not touch screens. I really wanted to avoid all of that, and it was a massive fight with a designer to kind of...
Dial it back.
What?
Dial it back.
Yes, dial it back. Oh, and by the way, I walked into this project and the designer had already been hired, and she was about to do touchscreen walls. So, so retaining all of these beautiful elements in the house, and also adding some display cases which are able to showcase our collection, which actually hadn't been acknowledged, that the collection that the Alice Austen House had was very important. Because most things had been lost, it was just assumed we didn't have our own collection, and we actually have a very important one. But we have a very fraught argument history with another historical society that has most of her glass plate negatives that doesn't believe that Alice was gay. So, Staten Island. So then we moved into, it had to be in tandem with programming. So before we even produced all of this sort of physical reinterpretation in the house, we started doing active programming. And so really looking at storytelling with LGBTQ groups, where they looked at Alice's work, interpreted it, and then told their own stories photographically, which was incredibly important to finding a voice for the text in the exhibition, and seeing how very diverse people, because these groups, the high school gender sexuality alliances and SAGE groups, they actually have lots of allies that go to those groups too, and also are very diverse in terms of people of colour, and they really helped inform how I would pull together quotes and text and writing to allow someone to do that thing where they walk into the Alice Austen House. What if there's nobody at the front desk? They could walk through and really get a sense of her and see where their own story could sit with her. And then finally, just to finish up, so we have this really robust program that is a contemporary platform for photography, because we are a living, breathing photographic museum. So for the past couple of years, I had been working on pulling together this show. I had always wanted to work with Collier Shaw since I came to the States 23 years ago. She's a lesbian photographer. I really admired her work, and this came out of collaborations formed in the Stonewall 50 Consortium. And all of the talent for these photographs, these are the renovated galleries, because we renovated those as well, are people that participated in the Stonewall riots and LGBTQ activists. And they all participated in a very much larger funded Google project, which is a digital Stonewall monument, which I highly recommend, and documentary. So I pulled, these people come from all over America actually, not just New York, and they came together for 2 days in the studio, and we worked with the photographer to produce that exhibition, which opened at the same time as the new interpretation. So that's the compacted story, and I still have some here. Thank you.